Hi guys, Paul from VIEZU and Paramount Performance here, and it's our next XF video. So if you've been watching some of the videos, you'll notice we picked up our lovely XF trial and prototype vehicle where we've been developing some new parts for it. Initially the vehicle did have a few niggles that we needed to sort out. There were some brake problems and some suspension problems. They're now sorted, so it's time to start adding some upgrades, which is the part that of course I'm really excited about. One of the first things we want to do is fit a couple of high-performance 200-cell catalytic converters. So Andy's going to be cracking on with that today. These are our 200-cell cats that come with EC certification. And whilst Andy's fitting these, we'll pop into our training room and I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the questions we get from our customers about 200-cell cats. What power should they give? Do they pass emission standards? And various other questions. So we're going to cover these topics while Andy cracks on and gets these fitted. So you join me upstairs now in one of our training rooms while Andy is busy downstairs fitting the new catalytic converters to our Jaguar XF. And I've got quite a lot to cover here about catalytic converters, and as always I don't want to teach anybody to suck eggs, but I think it's important we spend a little bit of time on this because it is something we get a lot of questions about. So first of all, let's start at the beginning. What is a catalytic converter and why do we have it? Well, catalytic converters were originally introduced in the UK in the early 90s. And actually, there's quite a lot of controversy around this because at the time, a bit like VHS video and Betamax, there were two main opportunities to reduce the emissions from vehicles. One, in fact, was a lean burn engine that was being developed. Now, the idea behind the lean burn engine is it runs on much less fuel than a traditional combustion engine, so the air-fuel ratio is much higher, and they burn quite a lot hotter, but could, in theory, produce miles per gallon as much as 60 or 70. So much better miles per gallon over traditionally what had been seen. The idea, of course, behind this is as you produce the same amount of power, but by using less fuel, you produce less emissions. So it was seen actually as quite a green movement, and there was a lot of research development going into this. The other opportunity to reduce vehicles' emissions was catalytic converters. Unfortunately for many, the catalytic converters won the race, and all cars from about 1990, depending on exactly where you're based, were fitted with catalytic converters, and the opportunity to have a gasoline engine running 60 or 70 miles per gallon was lost. So, with catalytic converters now winning that race, let's just understand what they are and how they work. I have a catalytic converter here. Basically, this end is connected as closely as possible to the engine. This literally bolts right up to the engine manifold, and this part goes on to the exhaust system. So your exhaust gases come out of the engine from the manifold straight into the cat, pass through the catalyst and out into the exhaust system. The idea behind this is that inside this catalytic converter there's a matrix, or sometimes called a core, and a chemical transition happens within that core that takes very nasty, bad gases and turns them into gases which are much better for the environment. Specifically, this is really called a three-way catalytic converter is the correct name for it, and the idea behind that is it converts three main bad environmental impact gases, including nitrous oxide, carbon monoxide and hydrocarbons. You can think of hydrocarbons, if you like, as unburnt fuel, and those three elements are particularly bad for the environment, and it's why the catalytic converter was designed, to stop those elements being produced and pumped into the atmosphere. So how does it work? Well, inside the catalytic converter, the matrix, a chemical reaction takes place and changes those elements into three much more inert gases, and that includes nitrogen, which is a particularly harmless gas, carbon dioxide, which is not particularly a good gas for the environment, but it's an awful lot better than carbon monoxide, and H2O. And H2O quite literally is water vapour. And that really is an act of pure alchemy, that it can take terrible gases for the environment and turn them into water vapour. So how does this chemical transaction happen within the catalytic converter? Well, inside each catalytic converter is what's called a core or a matrix. And this is made out of precious metals, specifically platinum, palladium and radium, and it's basically like a lot of little straws. So the gases are forced through this core. The precious metals are on the inside of this core and force a chemical reaction to take the not so good gases and turn them into much better gases for the environment. Now, this is where we start talking about cells of catalytic converters. And that basically is the number of little holes we have in the catalytic converter. A standard factory cat, like this one, will typically have 600 cells. And this is 600 cells per square inch of the matrix. Whereas a sports cat will typically have 200 cells per square inch. And you will hear people talking about 100, 200, 300 cell cats, and what we're really talking about is the amount of holes or straws that pass through a single square inch. So if you can imagine, if you've got 600, you're talking about a very dense matrix. The holes are very, very small to enable 600 of them to fit within 1 square inch, and with a 200 cell catalytic converter, the holes are much bigger, meaning much more gas can pass through much more quickly, and you get rid of your exhaust gases quicker with a 200 cell catalytic converter. One of the ways that you can tell that a catalytic converter like this is better for your exhaust gases is if you cut this standard factory catalytic converter open and held it up to the light, you'll see no light through it at all. It's a very, very dense matrix, tightly packed, but with a 200 cell cat, when you hold it up, you can actually see sunlight straight through it. And that shows that the exhaust gases can pass through much quicker and much more easier. A lot of people will ask us how much more power they will get if they fit a 200 cell catalytic converter to their car. And there's a simple answer to this, and there's a slightly more complex one. I'll try and answer both equations. On a turbocharged engine or a vehicle with a supercharger, particularly if it's been tuned to produce more boost pressure, you of course put more air and fuel in, and by definition you get more exhaust gases coming out. Now, when an engine is running in these days, the ECU is permanently measuring for lots of different things to make sure the engine is running in its prime condition. One of the things it measures is exhaust gas temperatures, commonly known as EGTs. With an engine with a catalytic converter, the engine is looking to see how quickly the exhaust gases are passing through, and if exhaust gases are starting to back up, you'll know the phrase of back pressure. Back pressure can build up before the catalytic converter, and at this point your EGTs start to get too high. So the ECU, no matter what you're doing with your foot on the pedal of the accelerator, the ECU will say, hang on, I need to back things back a little bit because my exhaust gas temperatures are getting too high. So although you're asking for more and more power by driving the vehicle, the ECU actually is doing things like retarding your timing and backing off the power to cool down your exhaust gases. This is going on all the time, thousands of calculations, quite literally a minute, without you even knowing. But the advantage is if you fit a 200 cell catalytic converter to your car, the exhaust gases will pass through much quicker, your EGTs don't build up, and your ECU is able to keep the vehicle at full power all the time without having to back off. And this is most important on a tuned vehicle, as I say, because you've got more and more fuel and air going in, more and more exhaust gases coming out, and of course you need to get rid of these gases as quickly as possible. And that's why a sports cat will really help. So it will help in a standard car by replacing with a 200 cell catalytic converter. To some extent, it will help the ECU keep your car at maximum power, but particularly on a tuned car, the catalytic converter becomes more and more essential. It's all great, very well fitting new supercharger pulleys and bigger boost pressure and bigger turbos, but if you can't get rid of the waste at the other end, your ECU will not allow you to develop full power that modifications like this can deliver. So things like supercharger pulleys, bigger turbos, etc. really need to go hand in hand with 200 cell catalytic converters so you can get the power in at the front and get the exhaust gases out at the back. And that is when a 200 cell cat really comes into its own, when you're talking about high performance vehicles that are tuned with more boost pressure than they had when they left the factory. Let's quickly talk about sensors on a catalytic converter. You will see there is a sensor at the front before the catalytic converter, and there is one after. People often ask about decatting a car, which is in fact where you remove the catalytic converter completely. And that can cause havoc with the engine management system, because this sensor after the catalytic converter is here purely to measure that the cat is working correctly. So the front sensor is setting the air-fuel ratio for the vehicle, and it doesn't really matter what you do after it, it doesn't matter. The front sensor is the most important one, and that's making sure your vehicle is running at maximum power. The second sensor is there to make sure those gases are being converted correctly through the catalytic converter and that the cat is working correctly. If you find yourself getting codes on a fault code reader like catalytic converter inefficiency, that's probably because either your rear sensor is failing or more likely perhaps even your catalytic converter is failing. So if you fit decaps, what you normally would need to do is map out the rear sensor. The advantage of a good 200 cell catalytic converter is you don't need to do that. You don't need to map them out and they will still pass the emission test. And that's one of the reasons when you're changing your cats to 200 cell cats, you need to choose a good quality part. So here I have an original Jaguar XF catalytic converter. It's a big old lump of metal and they get very, very hot in operation. So one of the things I often will say to people is if you're having your cats changed on a car that's maybe 4 or 5 years old or older, be prepared for it to be a little bit of a difficult job. The lambda sensors that go into the cat often will become very corroded with the amount of heat that's generated on the exhaust system, and they can frankly be very difficult to remove. Bank on having to change 1 or 2 sensors typically because it's just how it goes. The studs also and the bolts that hold the catalytic converters to the manifold often will corrode very, very heavily and can be really difficult to remove. So what looks like a simple operation sometimes with a couple of bolts at the front and an exhaust clamp at the rear can actually sometimes be a very difficult job to do. Not always ideal to do on a ramp or on your driveway. So if necessary, be prepared to book it into a garage and get it done professionally. But that is the make of the catalytic converter, bolting on at the front, clamping on the rear with a sensor, normally one before and one after the catalytic matrix. When we are choosing our 200 cell catalytic converters, like many car modifications, not all cats are designed equal. And I've got a couple of examples I want to show you here. This, as I mentioned, is a standard Jaguar catalytic converter running 600 cells. This is the matrix that we fit here. This has an EC approval and that shows it's been through an independent government-backed Euro 5 emission test. And this is really important. Most cats in the aftermarket do not have independent certification and actually are in theory illegal to use on the road. Whilst they will still pass an MOT, they've not been through a government laboratory to show testing, and that is officially required to use these parts on the road. I don't know of any other Jaguar cats anywhere that have this other than the factory standard cats. So it's one of the key things when you're looking to replace your catalytic converters, make sure you do fit a quality part that has been emission tested and is certified. The other thing to consider when you're replacing your catalytic converters is the physical size of the cat. And this is really, really important because you're potentially going to spend quite a lot of money on these parts. With the standard cat, you can see the size of the body here. Now, this isn't all matrix, there's a matrix inside of this, but it is still of quite a size. What you will often find is aftermarket cats look a lot more like this. The cat, frankly, is tiny. If you are being offered a catalytic converter of this size and being sold as an upgrade, I would question it very, very heavily. And there's some simple maths involved here. If this cat has 600 cells per square inch and this one has 200 cells per square inch, but this cat is 3 times smaller than this one, guess what? You've got the same flow rate. You're spending a lot of money to increase your flow rate and get rid of your exhaust gases, but all your exhaust gases are now being squeezed through this tiny box. In fact, you're getting no improved performance at all, and this is a question we get all the time. I fitted 200 cell catalytic converters to my car and I'm seeing no improvement in performance, and that's probably because your cats are not man enough and you're not getting rid of the exhaust gases any quicker than your quite good factory cats were doing. So it's really important to fit a large matrix or core when you're upgrading your cats. Well, why would people build something so small? Because those precious metals we talked about earlier are really expensive. So it's great to fit a really, really small cat. You don't use so much precious metals and everybody makes a little bit more money. But it's absolute false economy. You don't get the power with the smaller cat, and worse. You've got all of those exhaust gases now flowing through. You've only got so many cores and gaps for those gases to get through in your matrix, and what they do, of course, they burn out the surface of the matrix much, much quicker. So not only is your aftermarket 200 cell cat not giving you any more power, it's probably only going to last about 2 or 3 years before it completely burns out. and worse. In some cases, I've seen the matrix completely melt, it folds down on itself, it blocks the exhaust, and I've actually seen a number of cases of catastrophic engine failure by fitting a cat this small to a large brake horsepower vehicle. If you've got a vehicle that is running 400 or 500 brake horsepower or much more, you need a big cat. You've got to be able to get those gases in and get those gases out, and you want it to last some time. A cat matrix of this size, even in 200 cells, will last at least 10 years, maybe even 15 years. A cat matrix of this size, 4 or 5 years at best, and then it's going to start failing the MOT. That's even if it passed the MOT on the emission test when it was first installed. Many cats this small will not. If you rated that cat on a dyno, it's probably good for about 150 brake horsepower, but people are regularly fitting them to 500 or 600 brake horsepower vehicles with terrible results for emissions. You don't pass the emission test and they burn out really, really quickly. So I'll say again, if you see a cat being offered to you of this sort of size on a Jaguar vehicle or a vehicle running 500 or more brake horsepower, it's the wrong part, don't fit it. You need something that's this size, quite similar in fact to the manufacturer's original cat, but 200 cell to get rid of those gases as quickly as possible. So if you've got a 500 plus brake horsepower Jaguar, something like our XF downstairs, the most common question is how much power will this actually deliver? Typically around 20 to 22 brake horsepower across the rev range, maybe a little bit more, but it tends, a lot of the power comes in quite low down and then isn't quite as much higher up in the rev range when we see them dyno testing. Throttle response is something else people often mention they gain when they fit a good quality catalytic converter. Because you're getting rid of those exhaust gases quickly, the ECU is able to add more fuel and more air in quicker, and your throttle response reacts very nicely. And you will feel this on the road. So 20 to 20 brake horsepower is typical and a nice increase in throttle response. But if you start now adding supercharger pulleys and more boost pressure, that figure can actually get bigger. Not that the cats are making you more power, but your pulleys and upgrades are now working better because they can get more power in because you're getting rid of your exhaust gases quicker. And that really is the true art of what a 200 cell catalytic converter will do for your vehicle. One of the other really nice side effects of fitting a catalytic converter like this is a boost in exhaust tone. So these matrices, particularly the factory one, act a lot like an additional exhaust silencer. It's a baffle, if you like, inside the exhaust system, and it quietens down your exhaust tone. By fitting a 200 cell cat like this, more of that lovely V8 rumble can come out, your exhaust will sound deeper and more meaningful, and that's as well as, of course, giving you a great increase in power and performance. So another very common question we get is, should I decap my car or should I go for 200 cell sports cats? And it's a really good question. And the truth is, if you want maximum power, the way to go is for a decat. But, and it comes with a big but, in all of Europe, most of America, in fact most of the Western world these days, it is illegal to use a car on a public highway without a catalytic converter fitted. So it's great to go for decat if you want big power. Personally, I would say limit that to off-road use and true motorsport use. Unless, of course, you want the hassle of trying to get your vehicle through an emission test each year, failing the yearly fitness test, being in fear of being pulled over by the police or authorities for running a decap pipe, and all the fines and inconvenience that will have. But if you're going to fit a 200 cell cat, fit a good quality one with a large matrix, and you will find on a dyno or a test environment, a decat versus a 200 cell catalytic converter will give you almost the same power gains. So you stay legal, you pass your MOT, you keep your emission check engine light off, and you have all the fun and all the noise almost of having a decat pipe without any of the hassle. Decat pipes are great. Personally, I think keep them for off-road and motorsport use, and stay road legal is the way to go. Okay, so we're now back down in the workshop, and whilst I've been prattling on about catalytic converters for the last 20 minutes, Andy has been busy fitting them to the car. And he's done a lovely job. You'll see them fitted up here. These, of course, are the catalytic converters that go right the way back to the middle pipe. And most importantly, as I touched on earlier, you'll see the Europe certificate number. So that's the catalytic converters fitted. At the same time, Andy's taken the opportunity to fit our new full sports exhaust system, which is now switchable on the XF. But most importantly about these cats, let's drop it down and see how she sounds. Okay, so the last thing I really wanted to cover today is just a couple of things. First of all, how do the cats sound? They will sound a bit deeper than the standard catalytic converters, so as they let those gases flow a bit freer, you get a more deeper V8 burble. And then I'd like to carry out a Euro 6 MOT emission test, so you can see just how effective these cats are when they're tested. Give it away, Andy. How does she sound? So I'm sure you agree, that sounds absolutely great. So let's see how she does on the MOT test. You see here the vehicle's passed both the fast test and also the idle test, and it's passed with a very good degree of margin too. So that just goes to show these catalytic converters pass a full Euro 6 MOT emission test. So I know we covered a lot of ground there on these catalytic converters. I hope you found it of interest. As always, you can follow us on YouTube and on Facebook. And if you've got any questions at all about our performance upgrades or specifically about the 200-cell catalytic converters, drop us an email at info@viezu.com or find us at viezu.com. We hope to speak to you soon.